The parking lot was half empty. It was a Sunday. My cousin walked past my car without stopping. She glanced at it. Then she looked at her husband and smiled. He smiled back. Neither of them said anything to me. But I saw it. The way her eyes swept from the dent on my bumper to the faded paint above the wheel. The way her chin tilted up just slightly. The way her hand found his arm like she needed him to witness something with her. I was standing 15 feet away. She knew I was there. She kept walking. I stood in that parking lot for a moment longer than I should have. The sun was low. My keys were cold in my hand. And somewhere behind the noise of the family gathering inside, something clicked into place that I hadn't been paying attention to. That's when I realized something was very wrong. My name isn't important. What matters is this: I am quiet by nature. I've always been the one in the family who shows up, helps move furniture, remembers birthdays, and doesn't make noise about any of it. My cousin, I'll call her Mara, grew up 2 streets over from me. We weren't close as children, but we were always present in each other's lives the way cousins are. Holidays, funerals, weddings, the occasional Sunday at someone's house. Polite, functional, fine. Her father, my uncle, had worked at the same logistics company for over 19 years. Mid-level operations manager. Decent salary. Stable. The kind of job that quietly held a family together without anyone thinking too much about it. I worked at that company too. Not in operations. In compliance. I had been there for 6 years. I knew the building. I knew the people. I knew the processes. And I knew, in the way that someone in compliance always eventually knows, which corners were being cut and by whom. This is relevant. I'll come back to it. The Sunday of the parking lot was a family lunch at my aunt's house. Maybe 20 people. Normal enough. But I noticed small things. Mara's husband made a comment at the table about people who plateau. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. Mara laughed a little too quickly. My aunt asked me about work, and before I could answer, Mara said, "She's still at the same place, Mom." The same place. Not the company name. Not my role. Just the same place. Like it was something to be managed. A mild embarrassment. I ate my food. I smiled when I was supposed to. I drove home in my dented car with the faded paint. But I kept thinking about the parking lot. That glance. That tilt of the chin. I've been in compliance long enough to know that small signals matter. A slight change in someone's posture. A word that's just slightly off. The absence of a thing that should be there. I had seen those signals before at work. I had followed them. I started to wonder if I had been ignoring them at home. I thought about calling Mara. Asking her directly what her problem was. Maybe clearing the air. But I've seen what happens when you confront someone too early. They get careful. They cover their tracks. You lose the advantage of being underestimated. And they clearly underestimated me. So I stopped reacting. And I started watching. The watching started at home. Then it moved to work. Not because I planned it that way. Because that's where the trail led. 2 weeks after the family lunch, a colleague stopped by my desk. She worked in vendor relations. We weren't close, but we were friendly in the way that people are when they've shared a break room for 6 years. She sat down, looked at her hands for a moment, and then said something that I've thought about nearly every day since. She said, "I just want you to know, because I think you should know, someone has been asking questions about you." To people outside your department. I asked her what kind of questions. She said, about your performance. Your attitude. Whether you were a team player. I thanked her. I kept my face neutral. She left. I closed my laptop and sat very still for about 30 seconds. Then I started working. I want to be precise here, because precision matters. My uncle, Mara's father, was not my direct supervisor. But in a mid-size logistics company, operations and compliance overlap more than people realize. I reviewed vendor contracts. He approved certain expenditures on the operations side. Our work touched at the edges. I had flagged something 8 months earlier. A pattern in fuel expense reports. Small discrepancies. Not dramatic. The kind of thing that looks like rounding errors until you put them side by side on a spreadsheet and realize the rounding always goes the same direction, always to the same vendors, always on months that end on a Friday. I had documented it quietly. I had escalated it through the proper internal channel. I had been told it was being reviewed. Then nothing happened. I had let it sit. That was my mistake. Because what I didn't know, what I was about to find out, was that somewhere between my escalation and the silence that followed, someone had started asking questions about me instead. The document was not hard to find once I knew to look. It was sitting in an internal HR intake folder that I had legitimate access to as part of a compliance audit. It was a performance concern form. Informal. The kind that's meant to start a conversation, not end a career. But the language was specific enough to be intentional. Words like, resistant to direction. Operates outside her lane. Creates friction with senior operations staff. No specific incidents. No dates. No evidence. Just impressions. Attributed to a senior operations manager. I read it twice. I saved a copy through the proper documentation process, which I was authorized to do as part of the audit. I noted the date it was filed. It was filed 11 days after I had submitted my fuel expense escalation. 11 days. I sat with that for a long time. Not because I was surprised. Because I wanted to be certain before I did anything. Certainty is the only currency that matters in these situations. Then I pulled the original fuel expense reports I had flagged. I pulled the vendor registration records. I pulled the approval chain. And I found something I hadn't noticed the first time, because I hadn't been looking for it specifically. One of the vendors, a small fuel supplier that appeared in the discrepancies repeatedly, had an address that matched a residential property. I looked up the property registration. The name on it was not my uncle's name. It was his wife's maiden name. My aunt. I closed the browser. I opened a blank document. I began writing everything down in the order I found it, with timestamps and source references, the way I had been trained to do. My hands were steady. My face was probably blank. I felt nothing dramatic. No anger spike, no satisfaction. Just a cold, flat clarity that I have learned to trust above every other feeling. Confronting them would have ruined everything. The first thing I did was nothing. For 3 days, I went to work. I said good morning to the people I always said good morning to. I ate lunch at my desk. I reviewed contracts. I filed routine reports. I gave no one any reason to look at me twice. The second thing I did was make copies. Not one backup. 4. One on a personal encrypted drive I kept at home. One uploaded to a private cloud account that had never been connected to my work devices. One printed, dated, signed, and sealed in an envelope that I mailed to myself through certified post. One sent as a secure email attachment to an address I had created specifically for this purpose, on a device that had never touched my workplace network. I had learned this from a case study during my compliance certification. The instructor had said, "The person who loses is usually the person who had the evidence, but stored it in one place." I had written it down. I had never forgotten it. By day 4, I had a file that was thorough enough to hand to a stranger, and have them understand everything without a single word of explanation from me. I want to be honest about something. I thought about my aunt. She had made me soup when I was 12 and had a bad flu. She had driven me to a school event once when my mother couldn't make it. She wasn't a villain to me. She was a woman whose name was on a property registration that had no clean explanation. I thought about that for a while. And then I thought about the performance concern form with its careful, damaging language. Filed 11 days after I tried to do my job correctly. And I kept moving. On the 5th day, I contacted a lawyer. Not a family friend. Not someone I had found through a recommendation from anyone who knew me. I searched for an employment and corporate whistleblower attorney in a city 40 minutes away. I found one with a clean record and specific experience in retaliation cases. I emailed her from my private account using only my first name and asked for a consultation. She replied within a day. We met on a Saturday morning at her office. I brought the printed file. I also brought a written summary I had prepared, 2 pages, structured chronologically, no emotional language, just facts with dates and source references attached. She read it. She asked me 4 clarifying questions. She took notes. Then she set her pen down and told me clearly what I had, what it meant, and what the appropriate next steps were. What I had was documented vendor fraud, a verifiable conflict of interest, and a retaliatory HR filing that could be directly time-stamped against my original whistleblower escalation. What it meant was, my company had a significant legal exposure problem. And I had proof of it organized better than most professional investigators would have managed. What the appropriate next steps were, a formal protected disclosure to the company's external auditor, and if necessary, to the relevant regulatory body that oversaw logistics and procurement compliance in our state. She also told me that the retaliation filing against me was, under current whistleblower protection law, essentially unusable by my employer. The moment I filed a formal disclosure, that document became evidence of retaliation rather than a performance concern. I drove home with the windows down. I didn't call anyone. I didn't tell anyone what was happening. The family group chat was active that week. Someone had posted photos from a cousin's birthday dinner I hadn't been invited to. Mara had commented with several enthusiastic responses. Her husband posted a photo of a new car, a large one, recently purchased, silver with black trim, and several family members had replied with congratulations. I read it. I put my phone face down on the table. 2 weeks after my meeting with the attorney, the formal disclosure was filed. Externally. Through the correct channel. Protected under statute. My name attached, because anonymous disclosures carry less weight, and I had nothing to hide. The external auditor acknowledged receipt within 48 hours. The internal investigation was opened 3 days after that. I know this because I was informed, in writing, that as the disclosing party, I was a protected witness, and that any adverse employment action taken against me during the investigation period would be treated as a continuation of the retaliation already documented. I printed that letter. I added it to the file. At work, nothing visibly changed. The halls looked the same. People talked about the same things. Someone brought donuts on a Thursday. My uncle passed me in the corridor once that week. He nodded at me the way he always did. Routine. Easy. Unbothered. He had no idea that 2 floors above us, in a conference room I had never been inside, people were sitting around a table with a copy of everything I had found. He thought it was just another day. It wasn't. The meeting happened on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday, because I had packed my lunch that morning, the way I always did on Tuesdays, and I remember setting it in the refrigerator, in the break room and thinking, today is the day. I had been told in advance by my attorney. Not the exact hour, but the window. The external auditor had coordinated with the company's legal team and HR director. There would be a formal meeting with my uncle. His direct supervisor would be present. Legal counsel for the company would be present. An HR representative would be present. I was not in that room. I didn't need to be. I found out later, through the formal process, what happened in that meeting. My uncle was presented with the vendor records, the expense reports, the property registration, the approval chain with his signature on it, 17 times across 14 months. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. From what I was told, he sat very quietly for a long time after the documents were placed in front of him. His attorney, who had been called in at his request before the meeting began, advised him not to speak. He didn't. The meeting lasted just under 2 hours. By end of business that day, he had been placed on administrative suspension pending the outcome of a formal investigation. His system access had been revoked. His company email had been archived. The vendor in question, the one with the residential address and my aunt's maiden name, was flagged for a full audit. Payments made over the preceding 22 months were being reviewed. The total under examination was significant. I won't give exact numbers. But it was significant. The performance concern form filed against me was formally withdrawn. My attorney received written confirmation. The document was expunged from my HR file entirely. The company's legal team sent a carefully worded letter acknowledging that the filing had occurred in proximity to a protected disclosure and expressing their commitment to ensuring no further adverse action would be taken. It was the most cautious language I had ever read. Every sentence had been reviewed by someone who was very aware of what exposure looked like. I read it once. I filed it. Mara called me 11 days after the suspension. I let it go to voicemail. She called again the next morning. I let that go too. On the 3rd call, I answered. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't say hello in the normal way. She started speaking immediately, her voice tight and high in a way I had never heard from her before, and she said a number of things that I won't repeat here, because they don't matter. What she said, underneath all of it, was, "How could you do this to our family?" I waited until she finished. Then I said, calmly, because I had thought about what I would say if this moment came, "I did my job. The same job I've been doing for 6 years. The same job your father still had because I'd been doing it quietly enough not to look too closely at operations. Until I had to." She was silent for a moment. I said, "I'm why your dad still has a job to lose, Mara. He's been suspended, not terminated. That's not nothing." She hung up. I set my phone down. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly. It wasn't clean enough for that. There was something more complicated sitting in my chest. The kind of feeling that comes when something is finally resolved, but you can also see everything it cost. My uncle eventually reached a settlement with the company. He resigned as part of its terms. He was not criminally charged. The amounts, while significant, fell into a range that the company chose to handle civilly rather than escalate further. His attorney negotiated. Money was repaid. A formal acknowledgement was signed. He lost 19 years of standing in a single quarter. I don't celebrate that. I do think about the fuel reports. The rounding. The Fridays. The 17 signatures. And I think about the performance concern form, with its careful language about someone who operated outside her lane. I think about what would have happened if I had reacted instead of watched. If I had confronted Mara, in the parking lot about a look she gave my car. If I had called my uncle and asked him to his face why someone was asking questions about me in other departments. He would have gotten careful. Things would have moved. Evidence would have thinned. Instead, I packed my lunches. I said good morning. I built a file in silence while everyone assumed I was exactly what they thought I was. The family is quieter now. The group chat still exists. People still post things. Birthdays are still acknowledged. But there is a stillness underneath everything that wasn't there before. The kind that comes when people are no longer sure what someone knows. I still drive the same car. The dent is still there. The paint is still faded above the wheel. I haven't fixed it yet. Not because I can't. Because every time I consider it, I think about a parking lot on a Sunday afternoon, and a woman tilting her chin up at something she thought was beneath her, and I think, not yet. It will get fixed eventually. Everything does. I went home on the Tuesday it all came apart, and I made dinner, and I sat at my table, and I looked out the window at nothing in particular. The neighborhood was calm. The street was empty. Somewhere a few blocks away a dog was barking and then it stopped. I thought about the first day I walked into that compliance office 6 years ago. I thought about the instructor, who told a room full of trainees that the person who loses is the person who stores everything in one place. I thought about certified mail and encrypted drives and a sealed envelope sitting in my desk drawer with a postmark on it. I thought about how none of it had felt like revenge. Not once. Not even at the end. It had felt like doing the job correctly. That night, everything was quiet.